Hello, thanks so much for being here. My name is Sunny Liu. I direct research at Stanford Tech Impact and Policy Center. Today, it's really my distinct pleasure to welcome Tom Schnaubelt to join our seminar. Tom has a very impressive resume. I can spend a whole hour to read all the amazing things he has done, both at Stanford and at the United States, all the education systems. But I really want to highlight is, I think, is Tom's passion and the dedication to think about the critical issues the U.S. is facing today. It's about democracy, it's about education, but more importantly, how we can make the whole society a better place. So I asked my colleagues, Lonnie, to share with you, to write this introduction. But what she shared with me is really Tom's, really the dedication and passion to help all the students, especially students coming from rural places, coming from first generations, how to best make them to thrive under the education systems, and how we can, through education, to train the future leaders and make the whole world the better place. Today, Tom will join us, but also many of Tom's former students, friends, colleagues here, because they all want to listen Tom's new insights about how we can become a citizen in the age of algorithm. So please join me to welcome Tom.
All right. First of all, thank you, Sunny, for the lovely introduction, and also to both Michelle's and the rest of the Tech Impact and Policy Center. Will there in the back, thank you. Yeah, so you've invited somebody here who runs the Center for Revitalizing American Institutions to speak about becoming a citizen in the age of algorithms. So I'm sure that's probably not a natural connection. So let me tell you just a minute about what we do. We call it RAI, the Center for Revitalizing American Institutions. We're new, so many of you probably don't know what we do, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to share just a real brief bit. Our mission is basically to understand the crisis and trust in American institutions, and also the work to rebuild both the trust and efficacy, and those two things go hand in hand. We do research and we do policy work that's directly related to government institutions. So that would be legislative, judicial, and executive bodies at the state, federal, and local levels. We do research with and well, we do policy work and research regarding non-governmental institutions, sort of civil society organizations. So that could be the media, it could be higher education, it could be schools, our elections, all of that, sort of the de Tocquevillian work. The other thing that we do is that we focus on democratic citizenship, and that's the piece that's most relevant to this conversation today. In a lot of our work, when we say democratic citizenship, what we mean is the relationship that individuals have with those institutions, whether they're governing institutions or they are non-governing civil society organizations, and hence the focus on civics. One of the first things that we did when we launched the center was we conducted a national, basically a landscape analysis of the civics ecosystem. I'm not going to talk about that. Let me just check. Okay, yeah. I'm not going to talk about that really in depth today. If you want to check out the report, it's on our website. You can scan the QR code. You can download basically we found 12 main observations about the American civic ecosystem. This was based on looking at basically a bunch of reports that had been written about civic ed. So we did surveys with about 4,500 teachers across the country. We did focus groups and interviews with well over 100 people. And I just want to give a huge shout out to my colleague Karina Close and Connor Begovich, who were really instrumental in helping put that together. That report then, it basically guided our investments as a center into some of the work that I'll be describing. Not all of the work that I'll be describing today is part of the center, but I'll flag a few things that we are invested in. So just to outline what we have before us in terms of this seminar, I'm planning to say a few things, make some observations, share some definitions, observations about the contemporary challenges and some frameworks before I kind of move to a brighter day and talk a little bit about some of the bright spots that we have in civic education and citizenship education. And before I move on to supernovas, so those are more like the super possibilities that I think are laying in the future. To set the stage, I want to draw on the title of the seminar. So let me see, I think I might have gotten way ahead somehow. There we go. So we're going to become a citizen. I want to draw on that title to establish some boundaries and some definitions. As you can tell from our name, the Center for Revitalizing American Institutions, RAI focuses on the American context, which means citizenship in that context can mean being part of a liberal democracy that's governed by a constitution in the form of a republic. But today, if it's useful, I'd like to have a little bit more expansive view of citizenship, recognizing that we all have multiple citizenships that extend beyond what one colleague calls passport citizenship. I like Josh Ober's definition of democratic citizenship being active participation in collective self-governance, where we don't have a boss except each other, and where diverse citizens take responsibility for their government. It involves engaging in respectful civic bargaining, which is also the title of his book, to manage conflicting interests, treat fellow citizens as equals, and uphold the common good. Lee Neffelkamp provided a very concise way to define civic identity. It involves an attempt to locate oneself in community. That can be any community, not just a nation state. And my view is that the formation of civic identity is a key outcome of any educational enterprise. It's often undervalued, especially when compared to perhaps developing a career, but I think it's nonetheless, in my view, very important. I like to use Lee Neffelkamp's definition of civic identity as a starting point for defining civic education. Civic education is the cultivation of civic identity. It's locating oneself in community that also prepares a person for the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Doing that requires fostering knowledge, skills, dispositions. I want to also explicitly acknowledge that civic education happens not just in the formal environments, but also like K-12 schools and universities and colleges, but it actually happens in civil society organizations like the Rotary Club, boys and girls clubs, in faith communities, in libraries. I will tell you that I grew up, as Sonny mentioned, I'm particularly fond of people from rural communities. That's because I'm from a rural community. But a lot of my civic identity was formed by the 4-H club. It can also happen in online spaces like Nextdoor, Facebook, Twitter, these other third spaces. These are not always good spaces for civic identity formation. And that's why I've included a couple of normative commitments on the slide. The first normative commitment is that civic education must or should transcend or bridge ideological boundaries. The second one is that civic education must also model inquiry while engaging in the contested questions of civic life. I'm also borrowing this from Josh Ober. For example, we have to model inquiry when we're thinking about that fundamental tension, even in the term liberal democracy. How do we hold those things in tension? Liberalism, the rights of the individual, with democracy, the will of the majority. Okay, so both of these normative commitments actually bring bridging ideological boundaries, contested questions of civic life, lead us to several interrelated contemporary challenges that are distinctive to the age of algorithms. The first, and probably the most obvious challenge related to algorithms, is the impact of social media. The Council for Responsible Media, a cross-partisan group, cites a wide range of negative impacts: degraded mental health, especially for our children, growing political polarization, fragile democracies disrupted with propaganda, conspiracy theories going mainstream, and increasing distrust of foundational institutions. Perhaps most chillingly, they suggest that the economic and governance model that drives social media is fundamentally incompatible with a functioning democracy. I won't go into much detail about how our algorithms have contributed to or exacerbated the affective polarization or the political sorting that we're experiencing. Those ideas are documented by others and debated elsewhere. But I do want to mention a couple of ways in which this impacts the civic ecosystem, the civic education ecosystem. Considering AI in particular, I think its impact on education, and specifically, again, civic education, is related to the questions about whether it can help or hinder in the cultivation of wisdom. Whereas Anastasia Berg suggests the cultivation of cognitive competence. Berg writes that of the risk that AI poses. She says, "I have come to see that something far more fundamental is being put at risk. Developing our linguistic capacities to master diverse concepts, to follow an intricate argument, to form judgments, to communicate those to others, is the development of our capacity to think." Now, I suspect there is some truth in Berg's assertion, but I actually don't think we really know yet what the relationship between AI and our capacity to think or be creative. Just a few weeks ago, and if you look at the Stanford report today, they report on a conference about AI and education. And it was interesting. You're going to hear a lot from me later about human connection. That was one of the things that they really emphasized at that conference. But one of the other things they emphasized was the disproportionate impact that AI has. In fact, they talked about how affluent schools are using AI to help people be more creative, while others, the less resourced schools, basically the use of AI is as a consumption factor. The students are simply consuming rather than using those things to be creative. The one thing I can be confident of is that I don't think that AI on its own will make us any wiser. I'll give you a simple example. I was at a dinner party recently, and somebody asked, how many major league players in baseball are from Japan? Now, a few years ago, it would have been impossible for me to answer that question. I would have no idea. I would have had to research it for probably a month. But in a few seconds and in just a few keystrokes, I was able to say 13, and 3 of them are with the Dodgers. Now, first of all, I'm not going to vouch for the accuracy of that information, which is also one of our contemporary challenges. But all I did was transfer information. I wasn't showing any wisdom. If I wanted to show wisdom, I would have said something like, yeah, the Milwaukee Brewers are a much better team than the LA Dodgers, even though that their valuation is 8 times less than the Dodgers. That was a joke, you guys. Come on. Wisdom is far more than the transmission of information. In fact, some researchers point to the overabundance of information or the existence of information without friction, without editorial effort, as reducing epistemic quality. So what is wisdom? I'll cite 3 people you probably all know. Aristotle says wisdom is the combination of knowledge and understanding of the highest things, knowing why the world is as it is, not just how. It involves theoretical knowledge and moral insight. Plato says wisdom is knowing the limits of one's knowledge. It's a form of self-awareness, of intellectual humility. And Kant says wisdom is the application of reason to life, practical judgment that aligns knowledge and moral action. I'll point out that all 3 of these definitions deal with, in one way or another, the concepts of morality and self-awareness. The moral dimensions of civics are unavoidable, which brings me to another contemporary challenge, the classroom or the social dynamic in which people are teaching history and civics. Increasingly, people involved in teaching those topics report self-censorship or avoiding topics due to fear or pushback or controversy. The Sandra Day O'Connor Institute surveyed civic educators in 2025. This was a relatively small sample. 3/4 of them said that they had self-centered or avoided certain civics topics due to fear of pushback or controversy. The majority said that fear of controversy was a primary challenge to teaching civics today, while 71% of them said the same about fear of pushback from parents or community. A RAND report in 2023, which is a much larger sample, said 25% of teachers reported that their school or district had directed them to limit their discussions about political or social issues in class. And 65% decided to do that on their own. So now what? So I'm deeply concerned about the impact of technology, social media, and smartphones on the social and civic fabric. We could talk all day about that, and I suspect that people in this lab do that quite often. Rest assured, I am done with the dark side of things, the gloom and doom. I want to pivot now to a more hopeful tact and tone and explore some of the examples of how we can foster healthy civic identities, sometimes even using those algorithms to our advantage. I'm going to start with something a little personal. As I prepared for this seminar, I started to reflect on one of the seminal experiences that I had that shaped my own civic identity. This isn't 4-H. This is actually in graduate school. I had an experience where I led a student team to the Rincon Mountains in Arizona. I led and planned that trip with my colleague, Lauren, who's sitting right here. That's me. That's me with hair, if you're at all interested. So we led that after a catastrophic fire in the Rincon Mountains. For the semester before that, we had been studying national forest and national park policy about fire fuel suppression and land use management. So what made this experience so formative in my civic identity was that it was student initiated, it was student governed. We had a faculty advisor, much like Stanford's ASB program, but we decided what topic we wanted to do. where we wanted to do it. We identified the partners. We planned everything. It was also highly experiential and hands-on, and we were solving a real problem. It was focused on big questions, whether or not the National Park or Forest Service should change its land management policies related to fire suppression. It was also really challenging, both on the content end and on the sort of relational end. We were meeting new people, struggling with new things. So there was that struggle. Now you flash forward 30 plus years, and I and some others developed this framework for thinking about the formation of civic identity. This is the core commitments and building blocks of civic identity. We did this with Sandra Bass at UC Berkeley and Christy Lobo and Luke Terra here at Stanford. The four of us served as guest editors for a volume of the Michigan Journal of Community Service Learning devoted to this topic. And there's a bunch of case studies written by other people at other universities. If you're interested in that, you can use that QR code to download the volume of that journal. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail about each of these building blocks or the core commitments, but I want to point out a couple of things about this framework. First, the core commitments are values oriented, and they're much harder to assess or to discern, like how do we know we've gotten this thing? But these are things that are like commitments to values, practices, and institutions of liberal democracy. They ask us to consider what issues we really care about, to approach those commitments with integrity and a civic mindset. On the building block side, those are more skills-based. These are things that would be probably a little easier to assess if you were to try to assess them. They involve the capacity to engage across difference, the cultivation of democratic skills, the development of content knowledge, and maintaining a resilience of mind, body, and spirit. There are natural connections between the core commitments and the building blocks. For example, you have to have deep content knowledge, or not, the intersection between deep content knowledge and a commitment to an issue is really a reciprocal one. And I want you to think of these things as buckets and containers, not a curriculum. They're really meant for people who are educators to think, what are the categories for consideration as I'm trying to cultivate civic identity? So this is a framework that we used at the Haas Center. We developed it with a group of partners, again, started with UC Berkeley, some folks at St. Mary's College of California, and here at Stanford. But I think this framework is now used at about 45 different colleges across the country. This framework is really designed to serve as an example for students to think about what are the different levers that I can pull for social change. And the levers that, I don't know if you can read it here, but the levers here are direct service, philanthropy, policy and governance, activism and community organizing, social entrepreneurship, and corporate social responsibility, and something that's kind of unique to educational institutions, and that's community engaged learning and research. They can be applied to any problem. They're also politically agnostic. We developed also a diagnostic tool, which is really interesting, that we used across these institutions to track what are students interested in, which of these pathways are students most interested in, which do they think have the most impact. Probably one of the most enduring findings that we had, happened year after year, was the fact that students would often say policy and governance is the most impactful lever of social change, but it's unfortunately the one that they were the least interested in engaging in. Okay, I did say I wasn't going to go downer again, but I'm going to move to bright spots, back to bright spots. Keep me on bright spots. All right. So the first bright spot I want to talk about is the College 102, the Citizenship in the 21st Century curriculum here. This is a relatively new first quarter. It's part of the first year course sequence. It's the winter quarter. There's probably some people in the room who had something to do with the development. There may be some students who are in the course right now watching this online. I had no hand in developing the course. I am teaching it this time. This is the second time that I've taught it. And I continue to think this is probably one of the best innovations that I've seen for civic education at Stanford during my 16 years here. What makes it impactful? is, first of all, it's a requirement, and that itself is a miracle at Stanford. I don't know how the faculty got this through the faculty senate, but they did. The students are required to take 2 out of the 3 courses. What makes it impactful is it's a shared reading list, so that the students across any class have the same thing that they're reading and they're talking about it. I will say that I one time walked by Coupa Cafe, and there was a group of about 6 students in my class. I walked up to them. We'd gotten out of class about an hour earlier. They were still talking about John Stuart Mill, which was the thing that we were talking about earlier in that day. And that's the kind of thing that I just love to see. It's taught in small seminars of no more than 17 students. So there's about 70 seminars that are all teaching this shared reading every quarter. For me, this quarter is the first time that I used it, or that I've taught it without, basically I've said no screens, no devices. That has been hugely impactful on the dynamic of that class. There's plenty of asynchronous online activity the students do. It actually really helps to have them doing that activity, so that then when they come in class, we have these really great complementary discussions. A lot of the assignments are AI proof, meaning that they're basically, it's an oral midterm exam with the instructor. They're doing a lot of things like having to record a conversation between 2 of them or 3 of them. So there's these really things that are meant to be driving it to relationships. The other thing that's very fascinating about it is the central assignment is a collaborative writing project this quarter. And it's basically all 70 sections write a memo about what the university's policy on AI in the classroom should be. It all starts from the fact that the university doesn't know what to do with this right now. So they asked 70 groups of first-year students to say, what do you think we should do? And then the students upvote from different sections, and the one that gets the most number of votes from all 70 sections gets to go and pitch the idea to the provost. There's a sort of democratic self-governance piece to that I just really love. The bonus to this thing, though, I will tell you, is that what I really love about this course is every Friday I sit with about 8 other instructors from across the university, computer scientists, law professors, people who are in comparative literature, and we talk about, how are you teaching this? How did it go? What are you doing? And that has created this really interesting culture of a cross-disciplinary kind of, how do we teach, and how do we teach really well? All right. The other thing that happens with the college program, I just want to say, is they've developed these civic salons that actually have the opportunities for students to have these discussions in classes, in the residence halls, that deepen their content knowledge with professors and experts on the topic of the week. And I should say that Stanford residences are an ideal place to foster civic identity. Since 2008, we've had a public service and civic engagement theme dorm that was first in Branner Hall in 2008, and then in 2022, I think it moved to Otero Hall. So those are great opportunities. All right, so during this past year, RAI launched something called the National Civics Fellows Program. This was responding to one of the observations in our landscape analysis, that these civics programs are often siloed, meaning that they're done in one realm, like K-12 does one thing, higher ed does another, civil society does another, but there's not a lot of intersection. So one of the key aspects of this fellowship is that it's designed to foster cross-pollination between K-12, higher ed, and civil society. So we've selected exemplars in each of these areas. The people that you see on the slide are Trig, who's from Third Way Civics. He focuses on higher education. Stephen Morris is a civic educator with the Fresno Unified, and he does a really interesting thing around integrating civic identity and ethnic identity through this concept he calls Sankofa. And then we have Sarah, whose Every Museum is a Civic Museum, working with about 300 museum curators who are really interested in seeing, how can my museum be more focused on civic learning. She's also the person who oversees the Educating for American Democracy Community Learning Group, Learning Task Force. The fourth person that you see there, who is not Condoleezza Rice, is Joe Kahn, who's a researcher from UC Riverside, and he's the researcher in the group. The next bright spot I want to talk about is the emergency of something called the microcollege movement. It's been a particularly bright spot for me. Microcolleges are small schools that are committed to the formation of civic identity. They might not call it that, but some of the common features that they share are holistic experiences that focus on questions about meaning and purpose. They foster belonging and civic agency through self-governance. A lot of these places, like Deep Springs College, will actually have the students totally governing their own dorms. They actually are involved in the admissions process for the next cohort. They are also involved in selecting faculty for the college. They're deeply rooted in place and committed to building healthy relationships between people and the natural world. And they're often places where they have extended time away from technology. If you want a really good example, I would commend to you, look up Deep Springs College. It's basically kind of the mothership of these things. It was started in 1917 by L.L. Nunn. Many of the people who founded some of these other ones actually went to Deep Springs College. It's in Western California. And one of the commitments the students have there is that they have to work 20 hours a week on the ranch. So there's a labor commitment to that as well. All right, the next bright spot is the Deliberative Democracy Practicum. This is COM 138, 238, taught by my colleague Alice Su. This is a practicum that's taught every year. It's students that are in the practicum learn about and execute a deliberative poll, which was made famous by James Fishkin here. They get to choose the topic of deliberation. They often choose super easy topics like Israel and Palestine, abortion, free expression. No, seriously, every year they sort of, if you pick what's the flash, like what's the white hot flash, they just dive right into it. So they're responsible then for coming up with packets that are briefing packets that are presenting different perspectives of that topic. They also have to recruit speakers that share multiple perspectives. They develop a survey, a pre and post. They do the whole thing from soup to nuts. And I will say that sometimes these deliberations are in person, but a lot of times we actually do them online. We use the Stanford online deliberation platform. The beautiful thing about that is that it's infinitely scalable. And I know I've been slagging on AI, but basically AI is the moderator, and it's actually a fairly effective moderator in these cases. Because AI is not afraid to have a group of people be silent for a while as they sort of think. All right, the next one is, this is another one that this is another of RAI's new investments. This is the People, Politics, and Places Fellowship. So you heard Sunny say that I care a lot about rural places and rural students and students who are from first-gen, low-income backgrounds. Our landscape analysis found that there's a virtual cottage industry of programs that are like bridging programs that get discourse across difference. But one of the biggest gaps, especially in elite higher education, is programs that are focused on the geopolitical divides. This was especially true at the elite institutions. For the students that are a part of this fellowship, they participate in a year-long learning community. Each of them is focused on understanding domestic rural life. Each student develops either a research project or a community engagement project. And then the year culminates in a group project that helps disseminate the lessons learned. During that time, though, they usually participate in a summer internship. Guess what? At one of the micro colleges. That's where we're sort of trying to build those relationships out with places like Thoreau College in Wisconsin or the Tidelines Institute in Gustavus, Alaska. All right, so here's the supernova idea. So I'm going to shift as I reflect on the experiences of my life, on the things that have been most impactful, on the formation of my own civic identity, the challenges that we face. I'm convinced that the imperative that we have is an imperative to cultivate civic wisdom, civic imagination, and civic agency. You probably heard, especially civic agency, through many of the examples I've already given. Marilyn Robinson describes basically, actually, I want to say, thinking back to what I said about RAI and civic education, Part of our motivation, remember, is that civic education is the need for individuals to form healthy relationships with institutions, which includes understanding and knowing them. It also includes developing a sense of agency and positive relationship with institutions. And Marilyn Robinson describes that the best institutions, the best education institutions, are those that graft powerful models of community and helping students form an identity. I want to give you a series of what ifs. These are my supernovas that might be especially powerful models of community in developing civic wisdom, imagination, and agency. So what if colleges and universities, well, actually, colleges and universities, let me start by saying they are not democracies themselves. I want to say they're not democracies, but they can model democratic practice. Especially they can model innovations in democratic practice. They can also instill civic imagination in part by how they behave when they have to make decisions. What if ranked choice voting were regularly used in decision-making on a college campus? Or more radically, what if citizen assemblies were used or formed and used when leaders needed to make an important decision? What if the commissioning of the citizen assembly was part of the new student orientation at a university, and it became something akin to jury duty as part of your connection to that institution? What if one of the measures of institutional effectiveness was based on how well that institution cultivated civic wisdom, imagination, and agency? I know what you're thinking. What would that look like? For example, what if you asked students as they came into the institution to complete a survey that asked, does your voice matter in the decisions that we make as an institution? And you made that same question, you asked that same question every year. What if you did that and you tracked to see, does that sense of agency go up or down as the students matriculate? What if all colleges and universities used the same kind of metric and it was included in annual rankings? Very few Ivy League schools are located in rural places. Dartmouth, I think, is, but I don't know if others are. And I'd be willing to bet that none of them have student populations that are proportionate to the US population in that regard. What if elite institutions formed ongoing, deep partnerships that engaged not only students, but faculty in the rural places that offer a radically different type of education? What if in addition to Stanford in New York, Stanford in Cape Town, Stanford in Florence, Stanford in Kyoto, I could keep going, we had Stanford in Viroqua, Wisconsin. I know that probably you don't know where that is, but yeah. And then the last what if, and this is a perennial one, it's a perennial favorite of mine. We have flirted from time to time as a country about this idea of national service, like what, whether it's military or something like AmeriCorps or Peace Corps. But what if universities, what if elite institutions adopted such a thing where they said, hey, it's going to be, you're required to have a bridge year before, during, or after graduation. And I'll just add here, or a semester or a quarter, just something that would be a service-oriented requirement. I did lie to you. I think I said that was my last supernova. My last supernova is more of a call to action. REI's our other commitment that we've made is we're developing something called the civic profile. You can think of this as a Myers-Briggs for civics. Salvatore in the back corner is, raise your hand, Salvatore. He's our research manager, program manager, who's had a heavy hand behind this. What we are doing with this is we've created either new batteries or some using some pre-existing batteries that are looking at 3 dimensions. And so you're getting a bit of a sneak peek. We're still working on this. Otherwise, I'd be showing this to you in live time. Wait till March 9th. You'll be able to do this. What we've done is like you may have taken the political compass test or something like that before. That's like unidimensional. This profile actually does work in civic values, civic knowledge, and civic behaviors. And so what we're doing is we're offering people an opportunity to take this either individually where they can see, okay, where do I stack up against national averages on these things? Or you can also take it as a cohort. So in a couple of weeks, I'm going to give this to my students in my class. And so they can actually both take it and see where they land on various civic values, see where they are in comparison to that composite cohort, and then the national average. So why did we do this? Again, it's part of civics, but we were kind of thinking, listen, we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And we want to basically ask people, what kind of citizen am I? Or have them ask that of themselves, but also what kind of citizenry are we? That's really hard to say. Anyway, I invite you, we're going to launch this thing March 9th. Email Salvatore or tell him about this later, but his email address is here. And with that, I'm going to invite some questions in a conversation with Sunny. Thank you.
Tom, what amazing talk, and what inspirational talk. I love all those four what if. I think that is really make us to think about big, think about bold, and think about systematic change. So I will start from the dark side before I move to the bright ones. So what are some barriers for those what ifs? I just imagine at Stanford first.
The barriers, there's a lot of them, Sonny. Do you want to stay on the dark side here?
Yeah, I want to start with dark side.
Yeah, I mean, the supernovas, I intentionally use that metaphor because, I use the sun, the star for our bright spots. The supernovas are like, those things can happen far away. They take years to get, the light from those things takes years to get here, but they're also the dust. They create matter that become us, right? So I think the barriers to those things are mostly inertia. Like I also think size. I was having a conversation with somebody about those micro colleges last week, and I said, how do you scale that kind of thing? Like how can you scale those experiences? And the person said, maybe you don't. Maybe they're just not scalable. I don't know if that's true. I think part of it is just having the imagination of like what can be. And I think the barrier might also be that we're comfortable where we are, especially in elite higher education. We've got the resources to do a lot of things. That's what makes collaboration sometimes very difficult. When you have a lot of resources, I kind of found this when I moved from University of Wisconsin Parkside, which had experienced a 10% cut for 3 years in a row, my final 3 years there. People were prone to collaborate because you had to collaborate to get something done. At a place where there's a lot of, abundance, and I don't mean just Stanford, I mean elite higher ed. That collaboration, whether internally or with outside partners, that becomes rather difficult. I also think that there's a risk involved. The one about like, what if we measured civic agency among students and see where it's going? Where do people think that trend line would currently fall? Do you think it's going up or down over time? Yeah, I saw a couple of people going down. Yeah, that's probably likely. It's probably likely at every institution, and no institution wants to risk its reputation by showing something like that. But that's where I think the real leadership could come in, is to say, no, let's do this. Let's find out. Can you imagine a place where that trend line goes up? What that would look like and how that would feel to a student? I can.
Super interesting. For me, is I can see both like going up, going down, and to stay still, I think, parallel. I also can imagine some places, maybe it's a new university or some really resourceful university can do that. But I think as your friend, I think scaling is what I have in mind. All those really great experiences you show from the freshman seminar classes when you have at the Stanford small class size, less than 20 students, sit in the oval grass build and have those conversations. They feel they're empowered, have the agency, and have the voices. Instead of many state colleges, freshman classes, 500 people, 600 people in the room. I think those are very different education environments. I do wonder about all those successful stories you shared today. From those study abroad programs for those experience learning to the dorms to freshman seminars. Are there ways we can bring, I think, first, I think if we bring like a tiny bite size, like using AI or using some I think that online classes, some Stanford have those. Are those bite-sized ones really can empower what we mean is all those values, wisdoms we want? If bite-sized ones will not work, we really need those deep, valuable personal experience. Take a year, take resources, take a mentorship, and take lots of careful design thinking. Do we really get a society that 1% of students come from Ivy Leagues, they feel empowered to feel that they have those agency, and 99% of all the colleges are not?
Well, I think we have to do a better job of that. That's kind of what I'm saying in terms of the fostering civic imagination. I'll tell you about an experience I had last week with my class. We were studying the Constitution, like basically not the Constitution, but constitutions in general. And we were doing this analysis, and it kept coming up like, well, we'd have to change the Constitution, but we can't change the Constitution because we're too polarized. And I just stopped them for a second and I said, well, okay, what if we actually started from scratch? What if we took an incremental approach? Or what if we just wanted to change one thing about the Constitution? What would you change? And even at that last question, one of the students, the first student who spoke was like, is that a real question? Like, basically what she was saying is, I can't even imagine making any change to the Constitution. Now, it doesn't help that the last change that we had in our US Constitution was in like right around 1990, and it was on some very important topic like congressional pay. It's almost laughable when you think about that, right? Like the only thing they can pass is an amendment that says you can't pass a pay raise for yourself unless there's one election that's passed. Go and read the 27th Amendment and then compare it to things like giving women the right to vote and things, it's just like, and here I'm doing the thing I abhor, which is like going dark again. But for the students, we had a long conversation then about like, yes, it is possible to change the Constitution. And what would be what having to really push them to think about having an imagination of what could be, and not simply what is right now. That's not the only thing that can be. So I think whether it's incremental or if it's all at once or whatever, I think one of the things that we have to do, this is not just for young people, this is for people who are my age or older, is we have to remember that that things are changeable. That's what this country was founded on. I think we too easily slide into this, like, this is how things are, and so I can't change it. Yeah, I think that's why I was trying to press on civic imagination as one of the things. And one of the things that we have to do as institutions, again, is maybe think about how do we change the way that we're doing decision-making to be a model of those kinds of things, to say, well, okay, it doesn't take that much to change the form of voting that we do in a classroom or in a department or at the university level, to show them and say, oh, here's a different model that's not first, winner take all, first past the post kind of voting processes.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's really going to the bright side. I think it's really think about we have the agency and we can imagine a different future. That is where this country is built on. That is, I think, the future of this country. I have my last question, then now open to questions in the room. If you have questions, please send to the Zoom and we'll ask them as well. So Tom, I think that when I talk to young people, including college students and even a little bit younger ones, I think mental health crises are real, the suffers. The world is a dark place. So when they see news, mostly they feel that make them feel worse. So they have their proactively mechanisms, so not engaging all those kind of heavy, sad realities because it's a dark mirror. They can see that. So when we do those civic engagement, ask young people to feel empowered to make change. Are there ways we can have some protective mechanisms to make them better thrive in this world so they feel they can imagine they have power, they have agency, but at the same time, we have some, I'm not sure it's a safe net is the best way, but we have some mechanisms can also support them so they will feel overwhelmed too much will hit all those kind of really barriers. Are those institutional responsibilities, parts of education, or therapy? Any thinking on that?
Yeah, on the you're right. Mental health is a real challenge, and I think it stems a little bit from some of what I was talking about early in the talk. I want to point out, so I served as the executive director of the Haas Center for Public Service for 12 or 13 years. I, I talked a lot during that time, and I still believe this. Like, mental health can be really buoyed by having a sense of purpose and a connection to place. And if you want to see a place that does that really well, go look at the Haas Center for Public Service. They're actually engaging students in local community efforts, getting people out, doing so in a structured way. So not just get out there and do anything, but do something that is really well, thoughtfully curated by a team. I think there's a lot of evidence around the power of that, whether it's, it may in some cases show people, oh, the world is a dark place, but at least you're giving people a sense of like, I can do something about this. It's not a panacea, but I want to mention that as like one thing that I've seen over and over again is the power of engaging in community and with community as a bolstering device for mental health and well-being.
Thanks so much. I think that it's when people feel that they can contribute, have agencies, I think that can be a protective mechanisms. So now we can we'll open questions to people here. Anthony is running mics. So if you have questions, please, well.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say I really like the distinction between knowledge and wisdom as a way of understanding sort of where we draw a line in terms of like what this concern is with AI. That really resonates with me. But it made me wonder if there are any applications that you've seen or experiences that you've had or heard about where AI was contributing to the cultivation of what we would call wisdom rather than just rote knowledge or a lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go to a different place. I thought you were going to make a joke about like, have you ever seen where the St. Louis Cardinals are now? I don't have, nothing comes top of mind where that happens as like the consumption part of AI. I think there are facilitative models where AI can be used to engage groups of people. That's why I was bringing up the Deliberative Democracy Labs, the deliberation platform. It's not perfect, but the ability for that thing, that the AI behind that thing to curate, facilitate, moderate, I'm not sure what quite to call it, these conversations between people. So it's not so much, oh, I'm downloading this so I know how many Japanese players are playing in the MLB and that kind of information transfer mode, but it's more of like, how do we use that as a tool that might form or guide relationships between people that are discussing the moral imperatives, those kinds of things. Does that make, I don't have a good example of like, here's how AI has made me more moral. That's actually what a part of the point I was trying to make. No, I'm just, yeah. Do you have an example?
Oh. I didn't ask just to say my example, but I think my best example is honestly my ability to tell when something or someone is BSing me has probably gotten a lot better. And the need to check a complicated claim that is just more elaborated than a human BSer would really be able to do, has, I think, cultivated something that I think is worthwhile. That would be my example.
How do you think you developed that notion that I need to check it? Like that's to me the part that where
Experience.
okay. Right. In relationship with other people. Like, okay.
So when we wait for more questions from the Zoom, we have a couple questions from the Zoom. So Tom, so the first question is, when you characterize the need for citizenship and civic education, were there previous time period in the history when citizenship and civic education were attained? Since when were those needs identified in the United States? And how about the US, those civic education compared to other countries or like EU?
Oh, I'm not going to be able to answer the comparative part, but what was
Uh,
that's time in history where citizenship and civics were what? What was?
or I think attained, like in those moments, in the historical moments.
Oh, yeah, I'm not quite sure I understand the question. There have been moments in history where, yeah, I think civics and citizenship have been on the same oscillating platform that we are now in throughout our entire history. I'm not entirely sure that I understand what the
Yeah.
question is.
Yeah, we can pass this one. Later we can
Okay.
maybe elaborate. The next one is really interesting. It's about, I think, that social responsibility. And I think today we talk a lot about education institutions. What do you think about responsibilities for platforms, regulators? Do you think, so how do you think about if we want to get those what ifs? What are other stakeholders?
Yeah. Well, this may be controversial, but I do think that platforms should no longer be completely shrouded from liability. And I think, what is it, Section 230? I think that there's got to be work done. This is partly Nicholas Carr's book, Super Bloom, talks about how regulation of new technologies, new platforms is always about 10 or 15 years behind the social implications. I think we're in that space right now with things like social media and AI, where it's like it's plowing ahead in front of a lot of the practical things that are potentially or quite damaging to society. I think that's what the Council on Responsible Social Media is trying to flag. But I will say that that's not my area of expertise, but I think that that would be my personal opinion, is that we have to figure out how we're going to get to a place where the economic and regulatory models for things that are algorithm driven make more sense for the social fabric of our society or our nation.
Great. So next question from online audience is, rather than geopolitical divide, it seems political party divide exists about the definition of deliberative democracy in the United States. For the US, are you suggesting educating civic wisdom and deliberative democracy according to the Democratic parties and Republican parties?
No. No, I think partly what I was trying to signal with the normative commitment is that our civic education either has to bridge or transcend those parties. I mean, I think there's a case to be made that we don't have separation of power right now. We have separation of parties. And I think what we have to do is, and I think this is actually kind of what we're trying to do with the civic profile, is to re-elevate for people some of the enduring civic tensions that now get lost because people view them from purely partisan perspectives. I can't tell you the amount of time that Salvatore and I and our whole team have spent trying to think about what's the language that we can use so that people aren't going to instantly code this thing one way or the other and not be able to hear what we're trying to sort of lift up, not be able to see that this value is something that isn't it's not a problem to be solved. This is a polarity to be managed. It's something that is not going to go away. Think about federalism. You know, it's not going to end up at one end or the other. Think about liberal democracy. Like, you've got to balance those two things. So it isn't, my conception of this is that we have to really attend to that. Yeah, I don't think of it as something that we should be doubling down on, but we should be engaging civic education so that people can see more clearly those civic tensions.
Yeah, great. I love this answer. Really looking forward for the civic profile, and congratulations on those huge work. And I think we'll have to bring you back so you can show us what the profile look like and what surprised you, and what are some new insights you'll get. Thanks so much, Tom, for this amazing.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Appreciate that. So our seminar next week will have, so we'll have Ramos, one coming from actually not far away from Berkeley. We're talking about mental health interventions. If you're interested in not just mental health crisis, but what can we do about it, please join us next week. Thank you all for being here. Tom, thanks again. Yeah.